Hello and welcome back to Gapeys Garden. This is probably most likely going to be our last pepper update of the season. It got up to actually about 92 degrees one day earlier this month, which is really unheard of. We just smashed our record high temperature. But ever since then, somebody turned on the rain flip switch and it's been raining every day since then. So the end of the season is very near. We haven't had our first frost yet, but I can tell it's getting really close. But all of our peppers are still alive, so let's take a look and see how they're doing this time of year. We'll start with our mini chocolate Rocoto peppers. We've got 2 of them in this bed next to some leeks and one of my fig trees. And they're both the same variety, but it's a very young cross, so they're pretty unstable. This one here did come out chocolate, and the pods are much larger than the creator intended them to be. I did harvest a few of these the other day, so I don't think there's any ripe on there because I just harvested them. But we've got quite a few pods that may or may not ripen before the end of the year. And then the other one here, this one did come out about the same size and shape as the creator wanted, but these turned out to be a red color instead of a chocolate color. And it is super productive. The plant really sprawled out quite a bit in the last month or so. You can see these branches are going way out to the side and they're just loaded with peppers. I did just harvest these also. There is one here that's left that looks like it's about ripe. The stem is actually kind of dried up, so it probably is ripe. And they do come off really easily from the stem when they're ripe. And they actually look a lot like rose hips. This one has a little bit of a purple on one side, but most of them came out completely red. So I'm going to save some seeds of these and send these back to Chris Fowler, who I got this from, and see if he wants to grow these out as a red mini Rocoto. This here is our rodent-infested garden bed. We've got several mice, voles, and I think shrews that have been tunneling around in this bed, and we've caught several of them, but there's still a few that have evaded us. But they have caused a little bit of damage in this bed, digging holes everywhere and damaging roots. But the peppers, surprisingly, are still alive. These are all Mexican varieties. So this one here is a guajillo, and we've got a few ripe pods that I need to harvest and dry. So they are a nice, pretty decent sized pepper and are red when they're ripe. There's still quite a few green ones on here though, and I'm not sure they're gonna ripen before the end of the season. And then next to that we have a couple of pasillas, and this one seems to be taking a really long time to ripen. It looks like they kind of turn a chocolatey color, so I think this one is ripe, but we've got quite a few green pods on both plants, and they're really skinny and long, which I'm not sure is what they're supposed to look like, but that's how, at least this plant over here has a lot of really long, skinny peppers on it. And then this last one is the Craig's Giant Jalapeno, which turned out to be not very giant. I did pick a couple of ripe peppers on it, but this is about as big as they get, which is, I think, even smaller than my early jalapeno that I'm growing. This is one of the pasillas that is kind of crowding out this jalapeno, which probably isn't helping it grow very much. But we've only got a couple more peppers left on this plant. Now, this row I've got 4 early jalapenos, and we've got quite a few peppers still on a lot of these. Some of them are still pretty small, but I did harvest quite a few of these in the last couple of weeks. I am trying to harvest the ones outside the greenhouse a little bit more regularly. So we've got that one, and then we've got the smaller plant here, and we've got one that is starting to ripen there. We've got a smaller one that just has a few pods left on it, and then my biggest one that I started from seed is over here, and it is just loaded with peppers as well. So I'm probably maybe have enough to make some cowboy candy, which is a sweet kind of pickled jalapeno. Now we did have some pest damage on some of the peppers. You can see that hole there. I'm not sure what caused that, but I have seen some of that on a few of the peppers on this plant. Now the last two peppers in this bed are Chili de Arbos, which grew very, very differently from each other. If you saw my previous pepper updates, you saw this one here that was growing really tall and not as productive, but it is starting to get pretty loaded with peppers, but it was really late setting pods and ripening peppers, but there's a few of them in there. And then this other one is really tiny, but just totally loaded with peppers. You can see a whole bunch of ripe ones in there and a whole bunch of green ones still. But I have done a full harvest of ripe ones here a few weeks ago, but there's a whole bunch of new ones ripe, so I'm gonna have to pick those. But I've been just drying these, and we'll just use those for a chili powder. I still have my Tangerine Tigers outside, which surprisingly are still doing okay. They're in self-watering containers, so they're probably getting soaked from all this rain, but they are pretty small peppers this later in the season. They're not growing as big, probably because of all the colder nights that we're having. But we've got two of those. I did save some from this plant, which has lighter colored peppers than the other one, that I just thought was a better match for what I'm looking for. The walls are a little bit thicker, but again, these pods are a lot smaller than they were earlier in the season, so I probably won't save any seeds from this at this point, but I already saved some, so I'll be growing that one again next year. All right, time to move on to the greenhouse peppers. We've got our Baccatum varieties here on the left, and we've got one little basil plant that I'm going to be pulling out here pretty soon because it's just getting too cold for basil. But we've got our Sugar Rush Red, which is completely loaded with ripe pods, and I really need to pick these and do something with them. But I am planning on using a few for a blackberry jam, which I've been meaning to make for a while now. I just haven't gotten around to it. But we've got a lot of peppers on this one. I'll probably end up just drying the rest of them. Maybe I'll smoke them. I haven't decided yet, but we definitely need to do something with those here pretty soon. And this one here is the Ahi Guyana, another Ahi Baccatum variety, but it gets really nice long yellow peppers. And I have harvested quite a few of these, and I did end up making a fermented hot sauce, or actually it's still fermenting, and it'll probably end up fermenting for at least a year. But I used a lot of this pepper in that sauce. And then the last Baccatum over here, we've got the Criolla Sella. This is a really small, almost about the same size as the Chili de Arbol, but it is a kind of yellowish orange color, kind of a little bit citrusy taste, and it's got a decent amount of heat. Nothing too super hot, but it does have a little bit of heat. But we don't have too many more pods left, but I also put this one in the hot sauce as well. All right, let's take a look at what we have in the back corner here. This is a cucamelon plant, which is a tiny little cucumber variety that is really crunchy and slightly sour. It's really good if you haven't tried it, but it did end up getting into some of the peppers back here. So I have had to untangle it a little bit from some of the peppers because it likes to attach itself to whatever it can find. But this pepper here is my first successful grow of a bubblegum variety, and it has some really beautiful orange pods, and the bubblegum varieties have that orange color, or whatever color the pepper is, bleed into the calyx here around the top of the pepper and also up the stem. So that is a really neat trait of these varieties, and they are typically really pretty spicy, and this one is no exception. But it was really a pretty productive plant for the most part, and I did put a few of these in the hot sauce as well, but we've got quite a few more of these ready to pick, and I'll probably just pick a bunch of these peppers and just mix them all together and put them into a pepper powder. And then the last Chinense variety I have in the back here is the Benny Highland, and this one looks like it may have lost some leaves, but it is pretty much done. It's only got a few peppers left, so it's just kind of barely hanging in there. You can see some of the leaves are just falling off pretty easily. So this one can probably just be harvested and removed so I can make some room for some of my fall crops like spinach. So I'll probably do that later today and get that taken care of. There's a few others that I think are ready to come out. Now the rest of the peppers I have here in the greenhouse are all Annuum varieties. So they're pretty mild in their heat level and mostly sweet. So this one here has a little bit of heat. This is called the Gaby Hot Wax. So normally wax peppers don't have much heat at all, but this one does have a little bit of heat. And I did already harvest quite a few peppers off of this one, and I ended up smoking those and drying those into a pepper powder. But it looks like this one is getting pretty close to being done. We've only got a few peppers left on the plant. We've got one ripe one there. I think there's another one back there, but not too many more left on this plant. This one here is called Criolla de Cochina, and it's a kind of bell-shaped pepper, very sweet, no heat at all on this one, but this one is a little bit uniquely shaped because it has kind of a lot of ridges to the shape, so it's not completely smooth, but it has a lot of ridgy texture. Now this one, I did have a lot of problems with blossom end rot or just rot in general. It does seem to be doing a lot better a little bit later in the season, so I haven't had a rotten one in a little while. But it is a pretty big plant, but it isn't as productive as you would think for its size. But there are still quite a few peppers in there. I probably won't grow it again, but it's a decent pepper. But there's just too many other sweet peppers I like a lot more. You know, if you want a really super productive pepper, this Fushimi Japanese pepper is the pepper for you. This one has tons and tons of pods, definitely my most productive pepper that I grew this year. The only problem with this one is once it turns ripe, the pods get a little bit kind of rubbery and not as good. So you really want to harvest those before they completely ripen. Usually I pick them right when they're just about to ripen. And I just picked some the other day, so I'm not sure if I have any to show you. But otherwise, people usually just pick them when they're green like this, or just, you know, slightly starting to ripen. But once they're completely red, they just get, you can see it just gets kind of rubbery and soft, which is the only downfall to this variety. So you just have to really keep on top of the picking. Here's one back here I can show you that is just starting to ripen. So this is when I like to harvest them when they're still a little bit green, but they're just starting to show a little bit of color. That's when I usually like to harvest those. Now this time of year, when it starts getting really humid and rainy, I start seeing some fungus on the peppers, and so far I haven't seen much, but this one here is the first one that has showed some signs of fungus. So you can see here the stem on that is just kind of starting to get moldy. So that's what happens this time of year. But surprisingly, this is the only pepper that I've had that problem with. And this is the Chloe's Sweet Tangerine, which is totally loaded with sweet peppers. And this one is probably my favorite sweet pepper that I've ever grown. It's super, super sweet. Let's see if we can find some ripe pods in here. So they turn a really pretty yellowish orange color. And I did harvest a few of these for the hot sauce as well. So my hot sauce is probably going to end up being pretty mild because I did put quite a few sweet peppers in it. But this pepper is just a really, really tasty one, and it gets pretty big and productive. I do have a cage around it because I learned from last year that it can get pretty big and really needs support. I have a cage around this one too. This is the mini chocolate bell pepper. And it probably doesn't really need a cage. I just happened to get one on there because it was getting a little bit sprawly. But it's got quite a few peppers on there that are ripe and ready to pick. So I've been harvesting quite a few off of this one. It is a pretty tasty pepper. I'm surprised how sweet these chocolate peppers are. Now here's another pepper that is on its last legs. I think it's only got 2 pods left on it. This one here is ripe and ready to pick. This is called the orange Lecia, and Lecia is typically a red pepper, but this variation is orange. So I've got that ripe one there, and then I've got this really nice sized one here, and that is all that's left on this plant. So once this one starts ripening up, I'm going to harvest this and pull this pepper out. This one hiding back here that's kind of sprawled up against the greenhouse is a bell room, which is a cross between the bell pepper and a mushroom pepper, and it got super loaded with pods. It's actually got branches going all the way out to the side over here and all the way out to the side back there, but it's got some kind of medium to dark orange peppers, and they are very sweet, just like a regular bell pepper, but it's got a little bit of heat in it, which is a really nice surprise. So this is a cross that was developed accidentally by my mom, and this is the first year I've grown those, and we'll probably grow those again. Now these next two peppers look nearly identical. One is much more productive than the other, but they taste and look very similar. This one here is the Aconcagua, and I did harvest a couple of these the other day. This one is almost ready to pick. It's still a little bit on the orange side, but we've got a nice red one back there. And then I have grown this one before, and it's one of my favorites, so that's why I grew it again this year. And this one over here was supposed to be an Antohi Romanian, which does not look like that. So this must have either been a seed mix-up or it crossed with something, but it looks pretty much identical to the Aconcagua. You can see it's the size, the shape. I just did a harvest of both of these varieties the other day and gave it a little taste test, and I found the Aconcagua to be ever so slightly sweeter, but they were very similar. The thickness of the walls were similar, the seeds were similar, so everything was pretty similar. I did just count the pods on this plant, and there were, I think it was 17 peppers. So can you imagine 17 of these peppers this size on one single plant? So this thing is just overloaded with peppers. The one over here, not quite as productive. I think this one only had 7 or 8 peppers on it, and a couple of them are still on the small side. So I'm really surprised how many peppers this thing has. So I need some suggestions on what to do with all these huge peppers. Now here's my little Peter pepper, and it grew some peppers that aren't shaped quite like they are supposed to, but they're, oops, I accidentally just picked that one. They've all been kind of wrinkly and curvy. I finally got some that have started ripening. We're going to pick that one. But this one was one of the last peppers to ripen, and it still feels pretty firm, so I think this one is probably a good one to pick while ripe. We've got a couple more that are just starting, but I don't know why this one just took forever. But it's a cute little plant and nicely shaped, more like a little bush. It doesn't really need any support, so it's a really nice compact plant. The shishito pepper here is another one that is really productive. It had tons of peppers, and this is another one that you want to pick when it's green, just like the fushimi I showed earlier, because once it turns red, they do get a little bit rubbery, and we do have one here. It doesn't get as rubbery as the fushimi, but it does get a little bit soft. But this one still feels a little bit firm, so not too bad. But definitely suggest picking those while green. And we've been using these on our pizzas and making a stir fry out of those, but they're super tasty, a really productive and fun pepper to grow. And it is leaning over a little bit, so it probably could use staking up, but that branch is kind of touching the ground a little bit. This one here is called Tequila Sunrise, and it's got some nice orange pods, and I did smoke some of these. Oop, actually that one is, just noticed that one's cracking. Haven't had that happen on any of the pods, but that one is cracking, maybe from all the rain. It does get a little bit of rain because it's right here next to the door of the greenhouse, so that could have caused a little bit of cracking. But I think, actually it looks like that may be almost the last pod. We've got a couple here. So these 2 and 1 over here might be the last peppers on this plant, so this one should be coming out of the greenhouse pretty soon. But yeah, like I said, I did smoke a lot of these, and a lot of those went into the hot sauce that I made this year. And the last one here in the back has another cage around it. It's the Korean gochu, and this particular variety is called the Honggochu, and we've got a little spider friend there. But this is my favorite pepper that I grow every year, though I've mentioned before, this is the first year I've grown the Hong Korean gochu. But I don't know, I wasn't as thrilled about this one, mainly because it has really no heat at all compared to the Korean gochus that I've grown in the past. So I think maybe growing this in conjunction with a hotter variety and mixing those two together into a powder would be really good. But this one by itself, I think I prefer a little more heat than what this one provides. But still a really good pepper and highly recommended. I'll probably grow this one again next year along with some of my hotter gochu varieties. Well, we can't end the update without showing the peppers in a can. We've got our Count Dracula over here, which is looking a little sad because it is probably kind of thirsty. I've got these in the greenhouse right now to keep them out of the rain and have been neglecting them a little bit. So I'm sure with a little bit of water it will perk back up. We've got a wasp here checking out the pepper for some reason. We've got one ripe pod here that looks like it's fairly ripe, so it seems they don't get completely red. It's more of a kind of a dark purplish red. And then we've got a few that have not ripened yet on just the very ends of some of the branches. What is this guy doing? And then we've got our mini chocolate. So this is with the same variety that I've got growing in ground. We've only got 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 5 peppers on there, and 3 of them have ripened up. So I don't grow peppers in a can really for consuming. It's more just for fun and the ornamental value. So I'm probably not going to eat any of these peppers. And I didn't win the contest this year and actually ended up not entering any photos into the contest because I just didn't think my peppers did as well as I would have liked this year. So I ended up not entering the competition. But I will definitely try again next year, and I'm just need to figure out which varieties I'm going to grow. And then the last one, this one actually does have a little bit of fungus issue, it looks like, on some of these branches. This one is the Marbles, and this is a dill beer can, which is kind of fun. But this one also, I think, feels pretty light, so it probably needs some water too. But again, it's pretty much the end of the season, so I'll probably just end up tossing these in the compost here pretty soon. All right, that is how we're looking at the end of the season this year. I hope you enjoyed this year's garden updates. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you all soon. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. You can also find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.